Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the search for life's purpose.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is a big one,
Yeah,
but, hopefully it'll be fun.
for sure.
And we're going to be drawing from a talk by the spiritual teacher, Shunya Samadhi,
Okay.
who uses this really thought-provoking parable called the Parable of the Temple Builders to kind of illustrate why so many of us feel unfulfilled,
I love that.
right?
Yeah, I think that parable really speaks to like a universal longing that we all have for meaning.
Yeah,
Like something that so many of us struggle with,
absolutely.
at different points.
At some point in our lives.
Yeah.
And so somebody kind of starts off, setting the scene with these three stonecutters.
Okay.
And they're all breaking stones, right?
Yeah.
But each one is experiencing their work very differently.
Oh, interesting.
So one is filled with anger.
Okay.
The second one is filled with sadness.
Mm.
And the third one, and this is interesting, is filled with joy.
Wow. So they're doing the same task, but their like internal worlds are totally different.
Completely different.
Completely different. Yeah, and I think that this really highlights how like our perception of
Yeah.
our work, of life in general, really shapes our experience.
Absolutely.
I've definitely had jobs that felt like just breaking stones,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and so that first stone cutter's anger,
Yeah.
like I get that.
Totally.
Have you ever felt that way about a job?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think most of us have at some point.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get caught up in like the monotony of everyday tasks and just kind of like lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, you lose sight of like, what is this all for?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's where Samadhi's analysis gets really interesting. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he argues that this sense of drudgery
Mm-hmm.
and lack of fulfillment that a lot of people feel isn't inherent to life itself.
Okay.
It's not like life is just inherently
Right.
drudgery and boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
He thinks it stems from a sort of like societal sour grapes phenomenon.
What do you mean by that? So it's like those who haven't tasted life's sweetness,
Yeah.
who haven't found true fulfillment,
Yeah.
they kind of declare the whole vineyard sour.
Interesting.
And their message, unfortunately, permeates our culture
Yeah.
and influences how we view like work and success
Right.
and even happiness.
It's like they've tasted sour grapes and now they're telling everyone else, don't even bother trying the grapes. They're all sour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's this idea that like how many of our beliefs about like what's even possible in life have been shaped by people
Wow.
who haven't actually explored it,
Yeah. That's really powerful.
It is, right? It makes you really think.
It does.
And this leads to another really interesting point that Samadhi makes.
Okay.
And it's about this idea of overanalyzing
Okay.
and the dangers of that.
Interesting.
So he argues that like our tendency to kind of dissect and break things down can actually prevent us from experiencing like the wholeness of life,
Okay.
the interconnectedness of it all.
Like, we get so focused on the individual pieces that we miss the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see, it's like if you get so focused on the individual ingredients of a dish
Yeah.
that you miss the overall flavor.
Totally.
You miss the experience
Of it.
of
Yeah.
the whole meal.
I get that.
He uses this example of like a driver who's looking at a waterfall
Okay.
and dismisses it as simply rocks and water,
Oh, wow.
And so by focusing on the individual components, you miss the awe-inspiring beauty of it.
Yeah, you miss how those pieces come together to create something amazing.
Right. And so it's like missing the forest for the trees.
I see what you mean.
But I think there's also like a balance to be struck here.
Yeah.
Like, don't we need some level of analysis to understand the world around us?
That's a good point. Yeah. Like, how do we balance that need to understand with that need to just like appreciate and experience?
Right.
Yeah. Maybe it's not about like rejecting analysis altogether, but more about figuring out how to integrate it with like a sense of wonder and appreciation for the whole.
I like that. Yeah, it's not about getting rid of analysis.
Right.
It's about balancing it
Exactly.
with that bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think that ties in really well to Samadhi's discussion of what he calls the two forms of suicide.
The two forms of suicide.
Yeah. So the first one is like the more obvious one, right?
Oh,
like
right.
what we typically think of as suicide, which he calls wholesale suicide.
Yeah.
But then he introduces this other concept that I find super interesting.
Okay.
He calls it gradual suicide.
Gradual suicide. What is that?
So he's talking about this kind of like slow withdrawal from life, like numbing ourselves to all the beauty and all the potential.
Okay.
It's like a more subtle self-destruction
Interesting.
that can show up in so many ways.
And can you give some examples of that? Like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So think about all the ways that we kind of distract ourselves from really engaging with life. You know, like mindlessly scrolling on social media,
Yeah.
or like chasing empty achievements, or
Yeah.
constantly looking for external validation.
Yeah.
All of that can be seen as like a form of gradual suicide.
Wow.
It's like slowly chipping away at our aliveness and our purpose.
It's almost like we're extinguishing our own internal flame
Exactly.
because we're not giving it what it needs to thrive.
Yeah, we're not feeding it with meaningful experiences.
And what's crazy is that in a lot of ways, our culture actually glorifies those things.
Oh, totally.
Like we celebrate workaholics.
Uh-huh.
We celebrate people who sacrifice their well-being,
Yeah.
their success.
It's like suffering and self-denial have become virtues.
Yeah, and then joy and fulfillment are almost seen as like frivolous.
Right, like they're selfish.
Yeah.
But Samadhi's offering a completely different perspective.
Right.
He's saying that true fulfillment actually comes from embracing life fully,
Okay.
appreciating all the gifts that it has to offer, and finding meaning in our everyday actions.
So how do we make that shift? Like, how do we go from this mindset of scarcity and self-denial
Yeah.
to one of abundance and joy?
Well, Samadhi suggests cultivating a practice of gratitude.
Gratitude, okay?
Yeah, he really emphasizes like noticing and appreciating the simple things,
Oh.
like the warmth of the sun on your skin, or a delicious meal,
Yeah.
or like a moment of connection with a loved one.
It's about shifting our focus to what we have
Exactly.
instead of what we're lacking.
And he illustrates this so beautifully with a story about two prisoners
Okay.
looking out of the same window.
Where?
One prisoner only sees a garbage can and feels this deep despair.
Uh-huh.
But the other prisoner sees the moon shining brightly above
Okay.
and experiences this sense of beauty and hope.
Like that saying, two men looked out from prison bars, one saw mud, the other stars.
Exactly. It's all about perspective.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another really key concept that Samadhi explores,
Okay.
the true meaning of religious.
What does he say about that?
So he argues that true religiosity isn't about rejecting life
Okay.
or like adhering to rigid doctrines.
Right.
It's about embracing life in its totality,
Wow.
finding the sacred within the everyday.
So instead of trying to escape from this world,
Right.
we should be looking for the divine within it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things,
Yeah.
seeing the spark of divinity in ourselves and in everyone we encounter.
That's a beautiful concept.
It is.
It makes me think of that third stonecutter,
Yeah.
the one who found joy in his work
Mm.
because he saw it as contributing to something larger than himself.
Right. He was building a temple.
Exactly.
And this brings us to a really powerful question that Samadhi poses.
Okay.
If you could create a temple out of your own life, what would it look like?
Wow.
What values and experiences would you build into it?
That's a really thought-provoking question.
It is.
It's like it's inviting us to really consider what truly matters to us,
Yeah.
what kind of legacy we want to leave behind.
And ultimately, it empowers us to become the architects of our own lives.
Yeah.
To consciously choose joy over resignation, meaning over emptiness.
It's really easy to lose sight of that
It is.
when you're just like caught up in the day-to-day. But this idea of like creating a temple
Yeah.
with our lives is so powerful.
It is.
It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What am I actually doing here?
What are you creating?
What am I creating, you know?
Yeah.
And Samadhi actually shares this really interesting anecdote
Okay.
about Buddha Confucius and Lao Tzu.
Oh, wow. The big names.
I know, right? Like
hanging out together.
just hanging out, having some tea.
I love that.
And so,
What happens?
well, an angel arrives
Okay.
with a pitcher of what is described as like the nectar of life.
Ooh, the nectar of life.
I know, right?
Sounds good.
So Buddha, upon seeing the nectar,
Yeah.
immediately closes his eyes
Oh, no.
and declares that life is suffering
Right.
and meaningless.
So he's not having it.
He's not having it. He refuses to even try it.
Wow.
Confucius,
Yeah.
being the pragmatist that he is, takes a small sip,
Okay.
contemplates it for a moment,
Uh-huh.
and declares it to be bland and unremarkable.
He's not impressed.
Not impressed at all.
So 2 out of 3 not doing so well with this nectar.
I know, right? What about Lao Tzu?
Yeah, what about Lao Tzu?
Well, Lao Tzu doesn't even hesitate.
Okay.
He asks for the entire pitcher.
He wants it all.
He wants it all. He wants to experience every single drop.
Wow.
And so he drinks the whole thing.
Okay.
And then he starts dancing with joy.
Of course he does.
And he tells Buddha and Confucius,
Yeah.
you guys have missed the point.
You've missed the point.
Life can't be judged by a single sip.
Right.
Or by closing yourself off to it entirely.
It's about experiencing all of it.
Yes, and so it's like they each represent,
Yeah.
a different way of approaching life.
Right.
You have like the rejection, the cautious acceptance,
Yeah.
and then the full-on enthusiastic embrace.
I love that.
Right. And so ultimately,
Yeah.
our experience is really shaped
Yeah.
by how we choose to perceive it,
By our attitude.
by our attitude.
Exactly.
So are we going to be like Buddha,
Yeah.
rejecting life
Out of fear.
out of fear or preconceived notions?
Yeah.
Are we going to be like Confucius, just taking a little sip,
Just a taste.
a little taste, and missing out
Missing the whole experience.
on the whole thing? Or are we going to be like Lao Tzu
Yeah.
and just like embrace it all?
Dance with the nectar.
Dance with the nectar of life.
That's what I want to do.
I know, me too. This has been such an awesome deep dive.
It has.
I think Samadhi's insights are so powerful.
Yeah.
They really are an antidote to the negativity that can creep into our lives.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
It is.
Negativity.
He reminds us that we have the power
We do.
to choose joy,
Yes.
to find meaning,
To build our temples.
and to build our own temples of purpose.
And remember, you don't need grand gestures to build your temple.
That's so true.
Each act of awareness, each moment of gratitude, each choice to embrace life's fullness,
Yeah.
that's a brick in its foundation.
Beautiful. What will you build today?
What will you build?
Please like, share and subscribe.